acid casualty.
But from the north, a different wind was blowing.
The natural cards revolve.
A really cold one. The undiscovered world of the Edinburgh Underground had spawned a band who used another classic element of psychedelic music, multi-instrumentation, and elements of what some would now call world music, the incredible string band. John Hoppy Hopkins.
The incredible string band was just two guys, and they both had really extraordinary ears for melody. They were able to span the tonalities of, on the one hand, English folk music, and on the other hand, Indian music scales, and whatever lies between that. They were discovered by Joe Boyd somewhere in Scotland, and he put them on the national map.
A woman with the bulldozer built this house of now.
When I first met them, they were classic Scottish hippies, in the sense that I think there was a scene in Edinburgh that was probably more advanced than London.
The string band were archetypal hippies and used LSD as a compositional tool, but only because it was so much part of their lives.
For some people, it was so much a part of what they did that it was pretty much inseparable, that you assumed that was part of their whole experience out of which they were writing. I remember Mike Heron saying to me that there's a song on Wee Tam and the Big Huge called Puppies, a wonderful song of Mike's. He wrote it, sitting in a back garden in Mendocino on acid, playing with these puppies that belonged to the family that he was staying with.
Mike Heron from the band.
That's pretty much a solo effort, really. It's actually just me in the studio, pretty much, I think. It was a bit trippy. We were over in America, and Joe knew some girl that we'd stayed with up there, and she had a kind of dog, and the dog was giving birth to puppies at the time, and it was kind of a husky-ish type dog, not really a pet, and they would keep leaping off into the woods and bringing odd things back. So that's how it came about. And then the way that I did it was just in the studio with lots of multi-tracking and just a weird kind of echoey, timey thing that I suppose has a bit to do with LSD.
Done what you are. Just how far can you take me? How far can you take me?
I'm David Quantick, and you're listening to the History of Psychedelia on BBC Radio 2.
Oh, dear mother, what shall I do? First,
The incredible string band made a very successful attempt to create the sensation of a night on psychedelics. The result? A very cellular song.
say good night.
The classic track's a very cellular song, which is almost like a suite of songs written by Mike Heron, in which he brings in Bahamian hymns and Oriental this and medieval that.
It's like an attempt to give the experience of a trip by poetry and music. What it is really is like through the night with a little kind of record player and a keyboard and substances. It's like a diary of a trip, if you like. And it starts off, lay down, my dear sister, lay down, take your rest. That's pinched from some music from the Bahamas, which I was listening to at the time. So I pinched that bit and then wrote various bits around it, and the whole thing progresses as it would experience through the hours of night.
Amoebas are very small.
Split right down the middle, and when I look, there's two of me.
I suppose it doesn't make much sense unless you realise that that's an amoeba singing that bit. So I suppose if an amoeba was feeling a bit lonely, they would just split down the middle, and they wouldn't have to bother with sex or anything like that. That's the implication of that particular bit.
Oh, here we go. slithering. Here we go, slithering and squelching on.
Cellular images were something that was very prevalent in discussions about psychedelia at that time. You know, the idea that when you were high, you could actually look at your hands and see the cellular construction of your flesh and your skin, and you could actually break down and perceive what was actually going on under this calm exterior of your skin.
In the end, it ends with a kind of a blessing. Made a long time sunshine upon you, which would just seem that's the way that experience would end.
May the long time sunshine upon you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way on. May the long time
Perhaps the event that's most remembered for its psychedelic significance was the 14-hour Technicolor Dream.
The organisers of this country's first major psychedelic event chose May Day Eve for their all-night ritual and Alexandra Palace as their temple. They offered the Queen and the Prime Minister free admission and charged 7,000 other people £1 a head. They provided 20 beat and pop groups, 12 new wave poets, concerts of projected coloured lights moving in psychedelic synchronization to the music, green candy floss, mountains of bananas, and, for many of us, the first sight and sound of their message of love, the language of mellow yellow, the art of the happening.
Hoppy Hopkins was one of the organisers.
I was the guy who went and took out the rent on the hall. Or rather, I don't know if the rent was ever paid. I heard that they were after me for years, so perhaps it was never paid, but I was the guy who got the place. It was an event that went on for 14 hours. It started in the early evening, it went on until next morning. And just about everybody who was anybody was there.
They call the poetry, the music, the patterns, sculpture and films, the whole artistic output of the beautiful people, the work of the underground. Psychedelic is their favourite word. It means increased perception. It also means what happens when you take LSD and other drugs.
What did you think of this evening?
I thought it was marvellous, you know, I mean, especially as I was on a trip.
What do you mean on a trip?
Acid.
How do you mean?
LSD.
Arthur Brown was one of those 20 beat and pop groups. He remembers things slightly differently.
It was certainly not totally a love-in, because I remember my manager at the time, Kit Lambert, decided he would come to it, and there were 2 lots of swing doors, glass. There were the bouncers there, you know, and he got through the first door, and the bouncer, who are you? And he said, oh, I'm Arthur Brown's man. He said, no, I don't give a shit, you're not coming in here. And so Kit waited till he was talking to someone else and went through the door, and the guy came up and clobbered him. So next morning Kit came in with a big black eye, and I remember somebody said to him, where did you get that? And he said, oh, at the Love Festival.
Donovan was the baby-faced darling of the Love generation, a mod turned folky turned hippie. When not changing his image, Donovan's hobbies included taking acid. But although the LSD was important, it was the recollection of the psychedelic trip that was used for inspiration.
Well, you know, many people said, oh, you wrote all those songs stoned on acid or mushrooms. Well, actually, no. It's the secondary experience that entered the songs after you experienced this extraordinary event, which is very difficult to describe, but it's very experiential.
Gordon Claridge is Professor of Psychology at Oxford Brookes University.
People have done some studies of LSD, actually, and creativity, and shown that when people are acutely disturbed on LSD, they think they're creating quite well, but they're not actually, except that the experience, of course, subsequently might give them ideas for creative work. As Sylvia Plath said, you know, when you're mad, you're too busy being mad to think about creating. So I think there's a difference between the state and, if you like, the trait aspect of it.
The sound of Sunshine Superman was harpsichords, congas, it was flutes. They were very ethereal sounds to be using in pop music. They came from the world of world music and classical. And it's true, the sound of harpsichord came to me when I saw a raindrop falling off a leaf when I was on a psychedelic.